everyone, and welcome this press conference. President Stubb will first summarize his discussions with President Jinping, and then we have time for questions.
Thank you very much and good evening, and sorry that we're a little bit late. I've had the opportunity to spend most of the day with the leadership of China, including more than 3 hours with President Xi Jinping. We had a good opportunity to talk about bilateral relations. We are celebrating the 74th year of Finnish-Chinese diplomatic relations. The signature actually took place yesterday, 74 years ago. So we're moving into our 75th year. We were able to talk about our trade relations and many other joint ventures that we've had over the years. But I would perhaps assume that for the international media, it might be more interested to hear about our conversations on the security situation and regional security around the world. We had a very strong focus on Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. Very constructive, very open and very frank conversation. I've met the president twice before, and our conversation was constructive. I had 5 key messages which I wanted to convey from Finland and from many of our allies in the European Union and elsewhere. The first message was that Russia's war of aggression is a direct security threat to a country like Finland. Finland has a 1,340 kilometer long border with Russia, and when Russia violates international law, the UN Charter, the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, it is a security threat for us. The second message that I had was linked to NATO, and I expressed my view that it was not NATO that caused Russia's attack on Ukraine, but it was Russia's attack on Ukraine which caused both the expansion and the deepening of the alliance. Rest assured, Finland or Sweden would not have joined NATO was it not for Russia's war of aggression on Ukraine. The third point I made to the president was that China's relationship with Russia, I respect the autonomy of both sides, has a direct effect on China's relationship with Europe. So if we feel that Russia's aggressivity in Ukraine is a threat to us, then it has ramifications for anyone who directly or indirectly supports Russia. This, of course, includes many different components. The fourth point I made was that both China and Finland are seeking peace in Ukraine. But there should be no peace without Ukraine. That's why, in my opinion, the starting point should be Ukraine's 5-point victory plan and Ukraine's 10-point peace plan. Whilst I respect the plan put forward in 6 points by Brazil and China, in my mind it misses one key element, which is international law and the UN Charter. But as we all know, peace negotiations are extremely complicated. And we agreed with the president that we will continue to work towards peace and keep our dialogue open on both sides. The final and fifth point I made is that it is very difficult to trust President Putin, especially when it comes to nuclear weapons. And that's why it's extremely important that a major power such as China, keeps on having dialogue with Russia and make sure that we can de-escalate as much as possible. We had many other discussions and subjects during our 3 hours together, but perhaps those 5 points were the key elements that I wanted to outline to you as well in terms of the international media and the local media.
Now it's time for questions, and questions can be posed in English or Swedish. Let's start with Reuters.
Thanks, President Stubb. I want to ask, did you raise the issue of North Korean troops in Russia with the President? And secondly, what are China's views on the Baltic Connector investigation?
Sure. I mean, on those two questions, we discussed both of them. The Chinese official line on the war itself is based on 3 points. One is no escalation, no expansion, and no provocation. And of course, my message to the President was that North Korean activity right now, both in terms of arms exports and especially in terms of sending troops to to Russia, is escalation, expansion, and provocation. So we had a good discussion about this. My own analysis is, this is my analysis, not the words of the President, is that for China, the Chinese-North Korea relationship is not very comfortable at the moment. Because as a matter of fact, it can lead to escalation. And my message is also that there is dislike to the fact that NATO has partners, such as South Korea or, say, Japan. But the truth is, if North Korea is basically facilitating a war on the borders of Europe, we must be sure that it doesn't do that south of its border in South Korea. On the Baltic Connector, yes, we discussed it. The authorities have worked on this question, and I may add, very constructively. So I have no complaints, but I think we both agree that it would be good to finalize the cooperation between the authorities, and I hope that will continue.
Yeah, Philip Wood from NRK. Thank you, President Stubb, for taking time to meet us. Vi en liten kontingent med nordiske journalister, så vi har noen frågor. Merker du en forskjell på samtalen med Kina før og etter Finland ble medlem av NATO? Du sa før du ble president at en telefonsamtale fra Xi til...
Jag var en president då.
Ja, du var president då. Ja. Så mener du fortsatt, og hva sa Xi til å ta den telefonsamtalen?
Ja.
Mener du at nordkoreanske soldater som skal kjempe på russisk side i Ukraina bringer NATO nærmere Asia?
Okay. Do you mind if I answer in Scandinavian? Would that be okay? You can use Google Translate or something to that effect. The answer will be the same in English. So, första frågan, har Finlands medlemskap i NATO förändrat Finlands och Kinas förhållande? Svaret är nej. Jag tror att Kina förstår varför vi gjorde det. Vi skulle inte ha blivit NATO-medlemmar om inte Putin och Ryssland hade attackerat Ukraina. Simultaneous translation, the question was, does Finnish NATO membership have an impact of Finnish-Chinese relations? The answer is no. I think there is a clear understanding that we joined NATO because of Putin's and Russia's attack on Ukraine. The second question was...
Your telephone... på svenska.
Så andra frågan var att lyfte president Xi Jinping fram min intervju från Bloomberg där jag noterade att ett samtal från presidenten till Putin skulle sluta kriget. Jo, det gjorde han. Och det är självklart att han konstaterar att situationen är nog ganska mycket mer komplicerad än så. Men ska vi säga så här att the message was there. So the question was, did we discuss my Bloomberg interview where I said that one call from the president of China to the president of Russia would end this war. And I said yes. And of course the president of China is correct that the situation is much more complicated than that. Usually shuttle diplomacy entails many different phone calls from many different parties. Och tredje frågan var att hämtar det här NATO närmare Asien? Nej, det gör det inte. Men det drar mattan undan argumentet att NATO inte kan vara på något sätt engagerad eller ha partnerskap i Nya Zeeland, i Australien, i Japan eller i Sydkorea. För att nu kommer ju det där kriget närmare oss. So the question is, has North Korean export of arms and troops led NATO to come closer to Asia? I said, no, but it does sort of pull the rug from the argument that NATO or the alliance should not be involved. We have to remember that now we're seeing arms and troops being sent from North Korea to Russia to a war which is on the border of Europe. And when it's on the border of Europe, it does, in one way or another, of course, connect with the alliance, including a country like Finland.
Reporter from Taipei. My question goes back to North Korea. I want to ask, how do you assess the current and future security situation concerning the involvement of North Korea to Finland and also to the security of the whole Europe? And my second question is, how do you think that will also influence the relationship between your country and China if the situation changes?
Well, to answer the first question is that, on one hand I want to say, and I will say, that perhaps the involvement of North Korean troops in the war is an indication of the potential weakness of Russia. So what we're seeing is a country which is running out of its own troops because about 1 million Russian young men have either died, been wounded, or escaped the country. And 1 million out of 130, 140 million is quite a lot. We're talking about potentially 200,000 Russian young men dead. And now they need North Korean troops. The worry that I have here is that, this is potentially an escalatory move. So we could see an escalation. Of course, it depends on, how we see the activities of the North Korean troops. Does this have an impact on Chinese-European relations? I want to say not directly. And the reason is very simple. I am not at all convinced that China would like to see North Korean troops in Russia. As a matter of fact, probably the exact opposite. Because I think stability in Southeast Asia, and especially in the Korean peninsula, is in the interest of all of us. But this is what happens when you have rogue states such as North Korea acting in close partnership with a country like Russia, which is waging an illegal war of aggression towards an independent state such as Ukraine.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. President. And as we all know, the negotiations about the Chinese EVs between China and the EU have been ongoing recently. And we also noticed that Finland abstained in October's vote. And so, what do you think? What role that Finland can play in the process of the China and EU dialogue?
Okay, so I come from a small country and our approach is quite often modest, but I want to highlight that Finland is a member of the European Union. We have been since 1995. And what is quite often difficult to understand for the outside world is that the European Union has exclusive competence, which means that the European decides, Finland doesn't, on especially 4 things linked to the economy. Number 1 is trade. So where we promote bilateral trade relations, we always do it within the framework of EU rules. Number 2 is competition policy, or antitrust, as they call it in the United States. Number 3 is customs. We don't set our own customs at all. we set it on a European level because it's a customs union. And then number 4, what's number 4? So it's, sorry, I'm getting a little bit tired. So it's trade, it's customs, it's competition, and monetary policy. So what I'm trying to say is that we're limited within the scope that we can do. Now, on trade, we decide on majority votes. So you had Germany voting against, you had France voting in favor, you had a country like Finland abstaining. And from what I understand, there are now intense negotiations going on between Brussels, the Commission, which negotiates on our behalf. It's not Finland negotiating. Actually, Valdis Dombrovskis is a good friend of mine, former Latvian Prime Minister, who is a commissioner. And ongoing with the Chinese authorities. So we don't know where this is going to end. But my message is, again, I come to the point that I said earlier. Chinese-Russian relations has an impact on Chinese-European relations. And for China, the biggest internal market in the world is the European Union. So my worry is that we're going into a cycle of tariffs, of trade escalation, etc., etc. We need to avoid that. We need to have a level playing field. And this is the ongoing negotiation.
And the last question,
Dagens Nyheter åt fel håll.
Swedish or?
Anything goes. Well, no, not anything, but Swedish or English.
Svenska är mycket.
Oh.
Svenska? Ja, apropå tullar så har vi ju ett val här snart i USA. Och då finns det ju en sannolikhet att Trump vinner, och han har ju föreslagit ännu högre tullar mot Kina om han vinner. Hur ser du på, hur tror du relationen Kina-USA och Kina-väst påverkas om Trump vinner?
Okay, I'll do the answer in both Swedish and in English, because I think the question is very pertinent. It was about the impact of the US elections. Jag tar inte sida på vem som kommer att vinna, för att jag tror att ingen vet vem som kommer att vinna. För mig personligen som Finlands president så är det hemskt viktigt att ha ett bra förhållande med USA på grund av att USA är en av våra närmaste allierade, förstås tillsammans med Sverige och med Norge. Och jag personligen hör till de personerna som aldrig har sett någonting bra i protektionism, i tariffer eller i tullar. För att i princip så betyder det att du försöker använda kortsiktiga instrument för att stimulera din egna ekonomi. Och det brukar aldrig fungera i långa loppet. Men vi tar det lugnt och sansat. Återigen är det kommissionen som gör besluten i den här frågan. So my answer is that as President of Finland, I am of course open to who is the President of the United States. And I will get along with him or her depending on who wins the election. My gut reaction is that tariffs, protectionism is bad. It is always a short-term measure which never benefits the global economy or the national economy that tries to set those protective measures. Right now, unfortunately, globally, we're seeing a lot of countries turning inwards, raising barriers rather than promoting free trade. So I think the pendulum, if there was one, between free trade and protectionism, since 1989, the end of the Cold War, has swung from free trade towards protectionism. And I hope that whoever is the next president of the United States will see through this, because I think at the end of the day, free trade, most of the time, benefits the global good rather than just a narrow national interest.
Thank you for participation.
谢谢。